Some people get a phone call that changes their lives forever. I woke up to discover I had already died. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, legally. According to the state, I had been dead for 23 days. According to my bank, every account I owned had been frozen. According to the probate court, my estate was already being distributed. And according to the documents, my own parents had identified my body. My younger brother had signed as the next of kin. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 46 years old. I built Carter Logistics from a single delivery truck into one of the largest independent freight companies in Texas. Everything I owned, my business, my home, my investments, had taken 24 years to build. I never married. I never had children. So, if anything ever happened to me, my family would inherit everything. I trusted them. That was my biggest mistake. 3 weeks before I was declared dead, I left Dallas for a fishing trip in northern Montana. It wasn't unusual. Every spring, I disappeared for a couple of weeks. No phone, no emails, no meetings, just mountains, rivers, and silence. The only people who knew exactly where I was were my best friend, Mark, and the owner of the remote fishing lodge where I stayed every year. There was almost no cell service. That's exactly why I loved it. No one could reach me. No one expected to. For 12 days, life was perfect. Then a massive storm swept through the valley. The bridge leading back to town collapsed. Power lines went down. Roads flooded. We were completely cut off. The sheriff warned everyone that rescue crews wouldn't reach us for several days. Nobody panicked. We had food, generators, medical supplies. Eventually, the roads reopened. I drove nearly 6 hours before my phone finally connected to a signal. It exploded. 187 missed calls, 73 voicemails, hundreds of text messages. Most of them said exactly the same thing. Call us immediately. I frowned. Something had happened. I called my office first. Instead of my assistant, a stranger answered. Carter Logistics. This is Daniel Carter. Silence. Then the man whispered, Who is this? I just told you. Another pause. Finally he said, Sir, that's impossible. My stomach tightened. What are you talking about? He took a deep breath. They told everyone you were dead. For a second, I honestly thought someone was playing a sick joke. What? Your funeral was last week. I nearly drove off the highway. My what? Mr. Carter, everyone believes you died in Montana. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded onto the shoulder. My hands started shaking. What exactly are you saying? They recovered a body after the flooding. Your family identified it as you. The death certificate was issued. The company was notified. The court was notified. The banks were notified. I attended your funeral. I couldn't breathe. That's impossible. I've been fishing. I've been completely off the grid. The man sounded just as confused. I don't understand either. You need to come here. Now. I hung up. Then I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I called my father. Voicemail. My brother. Voicemail. None of them answered. Not one. An hour later, I reached Dallas. The first thing I noticed was the giant black ribbon hanging outside. My own company headquarters. My photograph stood beside the entrance. Flowers covered the sidewalk. Employees walked in wearing black. They were mourning me. I parked across the street. Nobody recognized me. Why would they? Dead men don't drive pickup trucks. I crossed the road. The receptionist looked up. The color drained from her face. Her coffee cup slipped from her hands and shattered across the floor. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Then she screamed. Within seconds, people came running from every office. Someone started crying. Another employee actually backed into a wall. One woman whispered, Oh my God, it's him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Finally, my operations manager stepped forward. He reached out and touched my shoulder. His hand was shaking. Daniel, you're alive. I nodded slowly. I've been alive the whole time. His eyes filled with tears. Then he hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. Around us, the entire office erupted into chaos. People were crying, laughing, calling someone. Others simply stood frozen. But in the middle of all that confusion, one question kept echoing inside my head. If I was standing here, then whose body had my family buried? For the next 20 minutes, I answered the same question over and over again. Where have you been? The fishing lodge had no signal. The storm destroyed the roads. I couldn't contact anyone. Nobody could believe it. Neither could I. Finally, my operations manager, Steve, closed the conference room door. There are things you need to see. He slid a thick folder across the table. On the cover were 2 words: estate proceedings. I stared at him. My estate? Steve nodded. Your family moved very quickly. He opened the file. The first page was my death certificate. There it was. My full name: Daniel James Carter. Date of death: cause of death: accidental drowning during a flash flood in Montana. I felt my stomach twist. It even carried an official state seal. Everything looked real. Everything. Except one thing. I wasn't dead. Steve flipped another page. This is the identification report. My mother's signature. My father's signature. My brother Ethan's signature. All 3 stated they had positively identified my body. I looked up slowly. That's impossible. I've never even left Montana before yesterday. Steve didn't answer. He simply turned another page. Probate documents. Transfer requests. Power of attorney forms. Emergency asset filings. Someone hadn't just reported me dead. They had already begun dividing everything I owned. I kept reading. My Dallas house scheduled to transfer to my parents. 40% of Carter Logistics. Assigned to Ethan. Several investment accounts. Already marked for liquidation. The process had started less than 48 hours after my supposed death. My attorney had objected. Twice. Then suddenly his objections disappeared. What happened to Richard? Steve looked uncomfortable. He resigned. What? He said your family convinced him there was nothing suspicious. That didn't sound like Richard Lawson. I'd known him for 16 years. He questioned everything. He trusted no one. He would never simply walk away. Unless he'd been lied to. Or replaced. Steve pushed another envelope toward me. This came yesterday. Inside was a bank notice. Every personal account I owned frozen. Every company account temporarily restricted until ownership could be confirmed. Payroll had barely gone out on time. If another week had passed, my own company could have collapsed. Not because I was dead, because everyone believed I was. I leaned back in my chair. None of this made sense. Then Steve said something that made everything worse. Daniel, your brother has been acting like the new CEO. I looked up. What? He fired 3 department managers. He approved expensive purchases. He even told clients he was taking the company in a new direction. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Ethan has never worked a single day here. I know. He doesn't even understand logistics. I know. He thinks freight moves itself. Steve nodded. I know. I stood up. Where is he now? Steve hesitated. At your house. My house. He moved in 4 days after your funeral. For a second, I couldn't even process what I'd heard. My family buried me and then moved into my home? Steve didn't answer. His silence told me everything. I grabbed my truck keys. I'm going there. You should call the police first. No. If this is some horrible misunderstanding, I want to hear it from them. 30 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway. My front gate was open. A luxury SUV sat exactly where my truck normally parked. The porch lights were on. Music drifted through the windows. People were inside, laughing. I walked to the front door. The spare key no longer worked. The locks had been changed. Someone had changed the locks on my own house. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked harder. Footsteps approached. The door opened. My younger brother Ethan stood there holding a glass of expensive whiskey. The moment he saw me, the color vanished from his face. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the marble floor. He whispered only 2 words. No, that's impossible. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Ethan looked like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe in his mind he had. He kept staring at me. His lips trembled. You're dead. I looked him straight in the eyes. Obviously not. He took 2 steps backward. No, we buried you. Those 4 words hit harder than anything else. Not we thought you were dead. Not we've been looking for you. Just we buried you. I stepped inside my own house. The smell stopped me cold. Fresh paint. New furniture. Even the family photos on the walls had changed. Every picture of me was gone. In their place were photographs of my parents, Ethan, and his fiancée Melissa. It looked less like my home and more like they had been preparing to live there permanently. My mother rushed into the hallway. The second she saw me, she screamed. My father appeared behind her. His face turned completely white. For a moment, the room was silent. Then my mother burst into tears. Daniel. She ran toward me. I took 1 step back. She froze. You thought I was dead. She nodded rapidly. We did. So why didn't any of you answer my calls yesterday? Nobody spoke. I looked at each of them. My father, my mother, my brother. Every one of them looked terrified. Not relieved. Terrified. That was the moment something inside me changed. If your son comes back from the dead, your first emotion should be relief, not fear. I slowly looked around the living room. My leather chair was gone. My grandfather's antique clock had disappeared. The artwork I spent years collecting missing. Someone had emptied my house. Where are my things? My father cleared his throat. We put some of it in storage. Some? Ethan avoided my eyes. Melissa quietly slipped out the back door without saying a word. Smart decision. She understood this conversation wasn't going to end well. I walked toward my office. The door was locked. Locked. Inside my own house. I turned toward Ethan. Open it. It's being renovated. I didn't ask. I said open it. His hands shook as he handed me a key. The moment I unlocked the door, my heart sank. The room was empty. Completely empty. My desk gone. My safe gone. Every filing cabinet gone. The shelves gone. Even the framed photographs I'd kept since starting Carter Logistics gone. Only dust remained where everything had once stood. I turned around slowly. Where's my safe? Nobody answered. My safe. Still nothing. I raised my voice for the first time. Where is it? My father finally spoke. We hired movers. What movers? They took everything. To where? We don't know. I laughed. A cold, empty laugh. You don't know where my entire office disappeared to? My mother started crying again. We thought. I cut her off. No. I want the truth. Not what you thought. Not what someone told you. The truth. Ethan suddenly exploded. Fine. You want the truth? We identified the body because the sheriff said they found your truck near the river. They said the body was damaged beyond recognition. They said they needed family confirmation. I stared at him. So you identified someone you couldn't recognize? Silence. My father looked away. That silence answered the question. Then another thought hit me. The DNA. What DNA? The room became very quiet. I looked from one face to another. Realization spread through my mind. No DNA test. Nobody answered. No fingerprints. Silence. No dental records. Nothing. You buried a complete stranger based only on clothing? My mother whispered. The sheriff said. I don't care what the sheriff said. You signed legal documents saying that body was me. Tears streamed down her face. We believed them. Maybe they had. Maybe. But something still didn't fit. Even if they honestly believed I was dead, why move into my house? Why empty my office? Why replace every photograph? Why start dividing my estate before the investigation was even complete? Then Steve's words came back to me. 48 hours. Everything had started within 48 hours. Far too fast. Someone had been waiting. I walked back into the living room. Where's Richard Lawson? My attorney. Ethan swallowed hard. He retired. No, he didn't. I spoke to his secretary an hour ago. He disappeared the day after my funeral. Now everyone looked surprised. Even Ethan. Interesting. That reaction felt genuine. Maybe Richard hadn't willingly walked away. Maybe someone had removed him from the picture. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Daniel Carter? Yes. My name is Detective Laura Bennett with the Texas Financial Crimes Division. My heartbeat slowed. Financial crimes? Mr. Carter, we've been trying to locate you for 9 days. I understand. You're alive. Yes. There was a brief pause. Good. Because we need you to come. Downtown immediately. Why? Her next sentence made every person standing in my living room go completely silent. Because someone has already sold nearly $18 million worth of your assets using your death certificate. I didn't say another word. I walked out of my own house while my family stood frozen behind me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to understand them. I was trying to protect myself from them. 40 minutes later, I walked into the Financial Crimes Division. Detective Laura Bennett was waiting with 2 federal investigators. She shook my hand. I have to admit, you're the first dead man I've ever interviewed. Normally, I would have smiled. This time, I couldn't. She led me into a conference room. A projector illuminated the wall. Mr. Carter, we believe your death was used as part of an organized financial fraud. She clicked the remote. The first image appeared. My mansion. Sold. The second. A commercial warehouse outside Dallas. Sold. The third. A vacation cabin in Colorado. Transferred. Then came my investment portfolio. Millions of dollars in stock liquidated. The total appeared at the bottom of the screen. $18.4 million. I felt sick. Who approved all of this? Laura looked directly at me. According to these documents, your brother, Ethan Carter. She placed a stack of papers in front of me. Every page carried the same signature. Mine. Except it wasn't mine. Someone had forged it. Again. Then she opened another folder. This is where things become interesting. Inside were surveillance photographs. A man leaving different banks, meeting attorneys, selling properties, signing contracts. It was Ethan. Every photograph had been taken after my supposed death. He wasn't grieving. He was conducting business. What about my parents? Laura sighed. We're still trying to determine whether they were involved or manipulated. I thought back to the fear on their faces. Maybe it wasn't guilt. Maybe it was panic. Panic because everything was falling apart. Then Laura showed me something that changed everything. Security footage from one of my warehouses. Timestamp, 5 days before I left for Montana. I leaned closer. The warehouse door opened. Ethan walked inside. 2 moving trucks followed. Workers loaded expensive equipment into unmarked trailers. I frowned. I never approved this. Laura nodded. We know. They used duplicate keys. Another video appeared. This one from my corporate office. Nighttime. Ethan entered my private office. He walked directly to the wall behind my desk. He removed a framed painting. Behind it was my hidden safe. Only 3 people knew that safe existed. Me, Richard Lawson, and Ethan. I remembered the day I'd shown him. Years earlier. He had joked, if anyone ever robs you, that's the first place I'd check. I laughed back then. Now I wished I hadn't. Laura paused the footage. Ethan emptied the safe. I stared at the screen. Inside that safe were property deeds, company ownership certificates, investment records, and blank notarized documents. Everything someone would need to steal an empire. My hands slowly curled into fists. This wasn't impulsive. Laura shook her head. No, this required months of planning. Then another investigator spoke for the first time. We checked Ethan's financial history. He had over $3.7 million in gambling debt. I looked up. What? He lost heavily in private investment schemes. He was bankrupt. Everything suddenly made sense. The urgency, the rushed funeral, the immediate estate transfers, the fake signatures. He hadn't wanted my company. He needed my money. And dead people couldn't object. Laura slid one final photograph across the table. I froze. It was Richard, my attorney, walking into a hotel parking garage. 2 men approached him. The next frame showed Richard getting into their SUV. He was never seen again. A cold chill ran down my spine. What happened to him? Laura folded her hands. We don't know, but we don't believe his disappearance was voluntary. For the first time, this stopped feeling like family betrayal. It felt like organized crime. Laura leaned forward. Mr. Carter, I need to ask you something. Did anyone besides Ethan know about your annual fishing trip? I thought carefully. Then I remembered. 3 months earlier, my parents had insisted on a family dinner. Ethan spent the entire evening asking questions. When are you leaving? How long will you be gone? Still going to that place with no phone signal? At the time, it had seemed like normal conversation. Now it sounded like planning. Laura watched my expression change. You remembered something. I nodded slowly. I think I told them exactly where I'd be. She didn't look surprised. I was afraid you'd say that. Then she reached into another folder. There is one final piece of evidence. She handed me a certified copy of a life insurance claim. Beneficiary, Ethan Carter. Claim amount, $25 million. My eyes widened. I don't even have a policy this large. Laura nodded. You didn't. It was purchased 6 months before your trip. I looked at the signature. Once again, it carried my name. Another forgery. Another lie. Another piece of a plan that had been building long before anyone declared me dead. Laura quietly closed the file. Mr. Carter, we no longer believe your death was simply exploited. She paused, then said the sentence I will never forget. We believe someone intended to make sure you never came back alive. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Someone hadn't just stolen my fortune. Someone had built an entire plan around the possibility that I would never come home. Detective Bennett let the silence settle. Then she slid one final folder across the table. We executed search warrants this morning. Inside were photographs from my house. Not the living room. Not the bedrooms. The basement. Large stacks of moving boxes. Wooden crates. Shelves filled with documents. My missing office. Every file. Every deed. Every company record. Everything Ethan claimed had gone to storage. It had never left the house. He had hidden it beneath my feet. Laura pointed to another photograph. My fireproof safe. It had been forced open. Inside, every document was gone. But one thing remained. A small leather notebook. I recognized it immediately. My personal journal. I used it to write ideas, future plans, and private notes. Nothing financial. Nothing valuable. Just thoughts. Ethan didn't take it? Laura shook her head. He probably thought it was worthless. She opened the notebook. A yellow sticky note marked one page. Read this. I looked down. 3 months before my trip, I had written, meeting Richard next Friday to update my will. If anything ever happens to me, 70% of my estate will go to the Carter Children's Foundation. Only 30% to my family. I froze. I had completely forgotten. The appointment was scheduled, but I canceled it because Richard became sick that week. The will was never updated. Laura looked at me carefully. Do you understand what this means? I nodded slowly. If Ethan knew, he would have believed he was inheriting everything. She nodded. Exactly. He wasn't stealing $18 million. He believed he was stealing nearly $80 million. My entire estate. Suddenly, the timeline became terrifying. 6 months before my trip, the forged life insurance policy. 3 months before, questions about Montana. 1 week before, breaking into my office. The day I left, everything was already in motion. This wasn't greed. This was preparation. Then another detective entered the room, carrying a laptop. We found something. He connected it to the projector. A security recording from my driveway. Date: the night before I left for Montana. Ethan stood beside my truck. He opened the hood. For nearly 20 minutes, he worked on something near the engine. I leaned forward. I checked my truck before I left. Laura nodded. So did our mechanic. She handed me another report. Someone had loosened my brake line. Not enough to fail immediately. Enough to fail after several hundred miles. My blood ran cold. If the mountain roads had been dry, the detective finished the sentence. You probably wouldn't have survived. The room became completely silent. I wasn't looking at fraud anymore. I was looking at attempted murder. Laura closed the laptop. We've issued arrest warrants. For who? Ethan Carter and 2 associates connected to the forged property transfers. What about my parents? She sighed. They're still under investigation. We haven't determined whether they knew about the breaks. I closed my eyes. Part of me hoped they were innocent. Another part remembered something my father always said. Never ask questions if you don't want difficult answers. Maybe they never asked. Maybe they didn't want to know. 3 hours later, I pulled into my driveway again. This time, 3 police cruisers were already there. Neighbors stood outside watching. Federal agents carried boxes from the basement. Evidence. Documents. Computers. Hard drives. Then I saw Ethan, handcuffed, walking toward a patrol car. The moment he noticed me, he stopped. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other. Finally, he spoke. You weren't supposed to come back. Those 6 words echoed through the entire driveway. An FBI agent immediately turned toward him. What did you say? Ethan realized what he'd done. His face went pale. I didn't mean, but it was too late. Everyone had heard it, including the agents recording the arrest. He looked at me one last time. Then anger replaced fear. You ruined everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took 1 step closer. No, Ethan. You did. You had everything. A family. A brother who trusted you. You chose money. His jaw tightened. You were never going to spend all of it. There it was. The truth. Not desperation. Not debt. Entitlement. He believed my life belonged to him, simply because we shared the same last name. The agents placed him inside the patrol car. As the door closed, he shouted through the window, "You'll die alone." The cruiser drove away. I stood there watching until it disappeared around the corner. Then I looked back at my house. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a crime scene. As investigators continued carrying out evidence, Detective Bennett walked over. We've recovered almost everything. Almost. She nodded. About $12 million is still missing. I frowned. Where is it? She looked toward the street. We think Ethan transferred it before your funeral. To who? She handed me a single wire transfer receipt. The recipient's name made my heart stop. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't my parents. It was someone I trusted even more. Mark Sullivan. My best friend. The man who knew exactly where I would be. The only other person who knew I would have no phone signal. And the man I believed had been worried about me the entire time. He hadn't just known where I was. According to the evidence, he had been paid millions after I was declared dead. For a moment, I honestly thought Detective Bennett had made a mistake. Mark? She nodded. The wire transfers totaled just over $12 million. I shook my head. No, you don't understand. Mark's been my best friend for 28 years. He was the best man at my parents' anniversary. He practically helped me build Carter Logistics. Laura didn't argue. Instead, she handed me another folder. Read it. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, offshore account records, then emails. One message stopped me cold. Once Daniel is officially gone, we'll split everything 50-50. Sender, Ethan Carter. Recipient, Mark Sullivan. The date was 2 weeks before I left for Montana. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. Laura spoke quietly. Your brother needed someone who knew your routines. Someone who knew where you'd be. Someone who knew nobody could contact you. Mark. Only. Mark knew the exact name of the fishing lodge. Only Mark knew I never carried a satellite phone. Only Mark knew I would be completely cut off for nearly 2 weeks. It hadn't been bad luck. Someone had chosen the perfect time for me to disappear. My hands started shaking again. Where is he? Laura looked toward another detective. They're bringing him in now. An hour later, I watched through the interrogation room window. Mark sat alone. No lawyer. No confidence. No smile. He looked exhausted. When Detective Bennett placed the wire transfer records in front of him, his shoulders dropped. He knew it was over. 40 minutes later, Laura walked out. He confessed. I looked at her. He says Ethan approached him almost a year ago. At first, it was only about money. Ethan promised him millions if he helped keep track of your travel schedule. I closed my eyes. So every fishing trip. Laura nodded. He knew. Every business conference. Every vacation. Every hunting trip. Every weekend away. Mark had been reporting my movements to my own brother. The betrayal hurt even more than Ethan's. Because family you don't get to choose. Friends you do. Laura continued. Mark says the original plan wasn't to kill you. I looked at her. What changed? She hesitated. Ethan's gambling debts. The people he owed wanted their money immediately. So the plan became. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Dead men don't come home. Dead men don't question forged signatures. Dead men don't stop $80 million from changing hands. 2 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the hallways. Everyone wanted to know how a successful businessman had been declared dead while he was still alive. The prosecution presented everything. The forged death certificate, the fake signatures, the insurance fraud, the missing assets, the brake line, the surveillance footage. Then they played the recording from my driveway. Ethan's own voice. You weren't supposed to come back. The courtroom became silent. His attorney lowered his head. There was no explaining those words. When it was my turn to testify, I walked slowly to the witness stand. The prosecutor asked one question. Mr. Carter, what was the hardest part of all this? I looked across the courtroom. My parents were sitting behind Ethan. My mother was crying. My father looked 20 years older. Mark stared at the floor. Ethan wouldn't even look at me. I took a deep breath. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the company. It wasn't even being declared dead. The courtroom was completely quiet. The hardest part was realizing the people I would have trusted with my life were planning a future without me in it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Several jurors wiped tears from their eyes. 3 weeks later, the verdict came. Back. Guilty. On every major count. Fraud. Forgery. Identity theft. Conspiracy. Attempted murder. Money laundering. Ethan was sentenced to decades in federal prison. Mark received a reduced sentence for cooperating after his confession. My parents were never charged with attempted murder. The investigation concluded they genuinely believed I had died, but they were convicted of filing false identification documents and unlawful estate transfers after admitting they never truly identified the body. They received probation and substantial financial penalties. I didn't celebrate. There were no winners. A family had destroyed itself over money. Over the following year, nearly all of my assets were recovered. The company survived. The employees kept their jobs. The unknown man who had been buried under my name was finally identified through DNA testing. He was a veteran from Oklahoma whose family had spent months searching for him. For the first time, they were able to give him the funeral he deserved. I attended, not because I knew him, because my name had delayed his family's chance to say goodbye. As I stood there, I realized something. He deserved to be remembered for who he was, not as the man everyone mistakenly believed was Daniel Carter. 6 months later, I rewrote my will. This time there was no confusion, no shortcuts, no assumptions. The majority of my estate would fund scholarships for children who had lost a parent in military service and grants for unidentified person DNA programs. So fewer families would have to wait years for answers. People sometimes ask if I ever forgave Ethan. The answer surprises them. Yes, I forgave him, not because he deserved it, because I refused to let what he did define the rest of my life. But forgiveness is not the same as trust, and it's not the same as reconciliation. Some doors close forever, not out of hate, but out of wisdom. Every spring I still go back to Montana. The same river, the same cabin, the same quiet mornings. The difference is I carry a satellite phone now, and before I leave, I tell only one person where I'm going. Myself. Sometimes people think the most dangerous enemy is a stranger. It isn't always. Sometimes it's the person who knows exactly what your life is worth. My family declared me dead so they could steal my fortune. They almost succeeded. But the greatest thing they tried to steal wasn't my company or my money or my house. It was my future. They failed. Because in the end, the man they buried was never me. It was the illusion that blood alone is enough to earn trust. And that's something I will never bury again.